Nice to meet you all. My name is Max Needle. I'm a geology professor here at Bellevue College. I'm going to be talking about using XR to overcome 3D visualization barriers in geology. I teach Geology 101, amongst other classes, and one of the biggest hurdles is true 3D spatial reasoning from 2D images for students. So I'm going to talk about how we can overcome that and how we can make geology more accessible through XR. I like to frame my geology classes as solving a four-dimensional puzzle. So we live on the surface of the Earth, and we're interested in what's below us in 3 dimensions. And sometimes we get a glimpse of this at the surface. But we also want to be able to interpret structures below the surface so that we can describe how these things evolved over time, hence the 4th dimension. And for the time piece, we use geologic principles to solve for time once we can visualize the structures below. So an example of a geologic principle would be younger rock layers are on top, older rock layers are on the bottom. But in geology, often, especially in education, we do a 2D to 2D leap. What you're looking at here is a geologic map, and each color represents a different type of rock. Then, from this, we build a cross-section, a slice of the Earth, and we do an interpretation of what's below us. But this is a 2D to 2D jump, and often we're missing the 3D component in between these steps. I'm going to now describe what traditional field mapping is like. We go up to a rock exposed at the surface, we measure its orientation, and then we'll identify the rock, conglomerate. And then we'll place the location and the rock type on a geologic map. Then we'll go to another location, identify, and take the orientation and plot that on the map. Then we'll go to another location, take the orientation, identify the rock, and plot it on the map. And once we do this enough, we can draw divisions between the rocks. We'll call these rock contacts, and we can devise a geologic map. Traditional field mapping, especially in the realm of education, involves going out into the wilderness where rocks are exposed. There's a lot of hiking involved. This is me as an undergrad right there, and right over there. But there are geographical constraints to this, and financial constraints, and locomotion constraints as well. So we have two things going on. One, we have some spatial barriers because we assume that people have the 3D component in their minds to go from a 2D map creation to a 2D cross-section. Then we also have an issue of access. Geoscience, recent scholarship has reported, is the least diverse of the STEM fields. And potentially one of the biggest reasons for that is the field component in education. So how do we get more people involved in geoscience? Well, I've redesigned Geology 101 formats for teaching here at Bellevue College. And this is my schedule for a quarter. And in yellow, we have interactive 3D object exploration. And then in orange, we have the virtual field environments. My hope is, as I continue to teach here, I'll populate more of this schedule with more virtual field environments. The XR tools that I use include Polycam for small 3D scans, and Metashape for photogrammetry of much larger things. And I deliver these Polycam models through Sketchfab, and I make my own Blender models for Sketchfab. And then for the 3D virtual field experiences, I use Unity. And I build to WebGL so that students with an internet connection and a computer can access it. I've also recently seen my students play these games on their iPads and through WebGL. So this is an example of what a student might interact with in Sketchfab. This is the mineral calcite. And one of the hard concepts to represent in 2D space is the idea that minerals sometimes fracture on what we call cleavage planes. And the orientation of those planes relative to each other is helpful in identifying minerals. So in the 3D virtual environment, I'm able to highlight those planar relationships. Here are some examples of rocks from Bellevue College that I've scanned. So this is a mineral. This is potassium feldspar. You might have seen it in granite before. And this is, if you think that's like mud, well, it's called mudstone. This is shale. I think it's pretty exciting. And this is gneiss. And these bands on it actually can inform us about stress directions during mountain building events. This next one is a fossil, which I use in a unit on geologic time. This is a trilobite. Another use case for 3D modeling for my class is understanding contour maps. So contour maps are 2D representations of 3D space. And they can be abstract. So in the 3D space, I extrude each level of the contour map. And we do exercises where we'll look at one perspective of the 3D model and then have to determine on the 2D map where we're looking from. Another hard concept in contour maps is this thing called the rule of V's. It's counterintuitive. I think when we're looking at the 3D model, we can imagine that water would run downhill in this direction. But you'll see when we represent it with contour lines, when we get the aerial view, right about now, we would think the water would move the opposite direction. So having these 3D models really helps visualize that. These are some examples of more complex geologic structures. This one plays into their final project, which we'll see a glimpse of. And here's another one where I'm showing steps of deformation. How do you go from a folded layer of rock to something that we'll see in the field? I'm also a fan of analog. So I teach 2-point 3D perspective drawings. I draw lots of block models with the students. These are just examples of what students draw along with me. And so they become familiar with representing these geologic structures in 2D and then 3D paper representations. And this I use in concert with the 3D models. All right, so we'll look at these last two. So we saw the 3D model of that. And although we conceptualize all of these geologic deformations in 2D and the 3D block models, it's really nice to see what they look like in the actual field. So I'm now going to take you to a site at which I did photogrammetry. This is in Shamokin, Pennsylvania. And students can play this in WebGL. They have tasks that involve looking at geologic structures, understanding time-based relationships between those structures, and some orienteering. So this is what it looks like for the students. Geologists who have been to this site really like it because they can fly around, which they're not able to do in real life. This is really high up, by the way. It's, falling down from that would result in a fatality. So these are folded geologic rock layers, and we're going to go to the end of this outcrop where we see two folds kind of in 2D, just like we would conceptualize them in cross-section. That's a rock slide. And this is another view of this strip mine. And then we'll zoom in to a side of one of these folds where we'll see a bunch of different types of fault orientations. and students answer questions about these. So it's really nice to be able to see real geology and how messy it can actually be after dealing with all the rock diagrams. We can also represent in 3D space the orientation of these layers, which is important for communicating our data in the field. So, if we're building towards geologic mapping, and we want to solve a four-dimensional puzzle, rock identities and geologic structures are part of this puzzle. The rock identities are like the colors in a puzzle, and the edges are like the structures. All right, let's see what the 4D puzzle looks like. This is the capstone project. This video is 1 minute and 20 seconds. All right, so here's our field site, campsite, and we're gonna fly around now. And our goal is to collect data to make a geologic map and then interpret in 2D a slice of that. So students go to these outcrops and they have to decide which side of the rock outcrop do I want to take a measurement from. Once they do, they open up this tool. I'm going to change the color so it's easier to see. And they'll plot a plane on the rock surface. They'll collect that data. They'll visualize how that rock surface is dipping. And then they click on these rock hammers to get the rock identities. And then they'll move on to another outcrop. They'll determine what side to take data from, take their measurement, and then they'll identify that rock. All right, so this is an overview of what that looks like. And they do mapping from that on this. So this would be what it looks like for them to plot their data on a map, which is based on the 3D model. And then they devise a cross-section from this. So
in suspense, but
yeah.
we'll get it working here in a second.
We don't. Okay. We got here. I got. It'll take a moment.
I can wrap up because I got the 30-second warning. I just wanted to add one more thing, that this works across modalities. So I teach in both in-person and asynchronous settings. So the 3D rock models primarily serve the asynchronous students, but the video games are scalable to both the asynchronous and in-person versions of the course. Furthermore, when it comes to makeup labs, having the asynchronous version with the 3D rocks and fossils is really helpful regarding just accommodation of schedules for students who have to make up work. So I wanted to thank you for your time, and as I continue at Bellevue, I look forward to building a lot more of these virtual field excursions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to see all of you here. Thank you so much to the Lockwood Foundation. Their grant has really supported and funding this conference. Thank you to this terrific XR Lab team and the committee that worked on this, Ron, Betsy, Morgan, Maria, just grateful for the media services and Sue Kerte's leadership. We've got wonderful student workers in the XR Lab, and thank you for all the presenters today. I'm really glad to be here with you. It's nice to follow up Max here as well, because both of us are presenting on a similar kind of theme, which is how are we integrating XR immersive learning in our classrooms. And I teach art history and architectural history. And what I like about what Max and I are both doing is we're really thinking about, in many ways, this cause and effect we're thinking about like how do you understand and experience both context, but also changing contexts and really concepts as well, and multiple viewpoints. So there's a nice sort of connection between the two of us in very different fields, but some overlap there as well. I am, as I was announced, I'm Deborah Leblang. I'm the chair of the art department. I mentioned I teach art history and architectural history. I've been at Bellevue College for 9 years, and I've been teaching for 18 years in total. When I arrived at Bellevue College in 2017, it was just the start, as Ron mentioned, of the XR Lab. And I was so excited to meet Bruce, get to know James as well through the process, and Ron, this wonderful team that's working on immersive learning. In graduate school 25 years ago, I worked on a project called Mapping Gothic, and it's through the Media Center for Art History at Columbia University, and it's this idea of really mapping Gothic architecture, not just for how architecture works in terms of plan, section, and elevation, but also thinking of these spaces filled with sound. In particular, one of the graduate students who worked on this project has a background in opera singing and really wanted to have an acoustical kind of opportunity and sort of thinking about space and place and experience in these three-dimensional kind of ways. So that's my background. What I wanted to do today, a little differently than the PowerPoint presentation to give you two sides of things, is I'm going to bring you into one of my live courses. It's called Art 101. The course is titled Modern Architecture and Design. It starts at 1850 in terms of architecture. We cover all the fields of interiors like wallpaper, furniture, lighting, textiles, and then the exteriors as well. The focus of this class is American and European. And so I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about how some of that will kind of show up for you in class. Let me move it's always tricky when I have let me stop my share for 1 second. I just have to move my screen down a little bit because Zoom tends to kind of overlap the way I want to move things. Oh, I think that's pretty good. I think that'll work for us. So this is how my course looks when you walk into it. And like I mentioned, it's a live course. It's called Art 101, Modern Architecture and Design. And the course is designed in mind with integrating as much as I can some of these immersive opportunities. And there's small pieces of it throughout the course, but there's really three main points I want to bring you to as sort of stop points, both to show you how that is integrated and in a few student examples as well. You'll notice I've kind of starred them here at week 2, week 7, and then again week 11. And then my welcome presentation just to let you know a little bit about what I'd like to cover. So like I mentioned, thank yous to the conference folks and the foundation, Lockwood Grant folks as well. Again, about comments about art department, and then really about my interests in art, technology, and innovation for the last 2 decades have been a little more than that actually, have been really important. I like these features for XR that are about multiple types of learning. I like this idea of multiple opportunities for learning. You know, we've seen this with Kay's presentation, actually, all of these terrific presentations that we've had with Jeff and Chad and Ethan about this sort of way in which there's a chance to sort of be inclusive in many ways. Accessible is another way of describing it, and fun, which I think has been captured by all the presentations so far. I really enjoyed Max's feature of adding a fun piece too. So that's what I wanted to show you and to think about. I look forward to hearing your questions, and if they don't get answered now, you're welcome to contact me and we can start a conversation. Week 2, we'll talk a little bit about a local field guide. And the way I do that is I have the students choose their study area. It can be either the campus or their local neighborhood, which often works for asynchronous classes. And sort of we both use both in-person experience of walking around a space, but also preempting that experience by looking at it in Google Earth. And then I'll talk a little bit about that week 7 visit to the UW campus. The reason I choose the University of Washington campus in Seattle is the first buildings were built there in 1867. And then we have the most recent buildings from just a few years ago. So the students have a full range of all the decades in which this class covers, which is 150 years. And it's relatively close, and there's some safety concerns that I can kind of manage in some ways here. And so I like that it's a closed campus and a way to experience the architectural topics we talk about. And then lastly, we always visit every term the XR lab. All my in-person classes come to the XR lab, which has been a wonderful opportunity for us. So that gives you a little bit of an overview. Like I mentioned, the class begins about noted designers 1850 forward. And we talk about technological innovation in class. Usually it's more about the elevator or steel construction, etc., reinforced concrete. But this is a way for me to add technology into the class as it is right now. So to bring you forward into the class, and again, I'm really using what essentially becomes a lesson plan. So there's a pairing between lesson plan in my teaching and assignment. And I'm showing you that in lecture time, we end up using really opportunities to think about sorry, folks, to look at really significant architectural that will play a role in the class that's local. And so in some cases, we look at things in sort of a traditional kind of way. So we may look at famous architects like Frank Gehry's work, or we may look at older classical architecture of classical revival style in King Street Station. And then I typically bring students in by looking at Google Earth. And so this is week 2. It's the beginning of class. I'm just starting to talk about how do we think about context and how do we think about innovation? How do we look at buildings that may fit in and buildings that may stand out? And we spend a little bit of time sort of looking through each of those buildings on that list, both in sort of a flat plane of system, more systematic way, plan, section, elevation, and more propaganda kind of things, but also in Google Earth. So that's the beginning introduction to talking about the value of using Google Earth as a way to kind of have a bird's eye view or swoop in. And then students use that for their own study area. They can either use the Bellevue College campus or they can use the local area. I have a student here who I talked to about sharing their work, and they used their area was, I believe the student was Redmond. And in this case, students are really looking at things they want to get up close to, but they also wanted to map out what does that sort of area look like and how does that fit in? And then they reflect on what is it like to plan the project and what is it like to complete the project? What was unexpected for them? And so that's a nice way to think about both in-person opportunities of experience, but also planned opportunities ahead of time. What will we see? The next one I wanted to show you is really week 7, somewhere either week 7 in the middle of the class. And again, I include a Google Earth sort of discussion, and that's in class, and we look at different buildings, and we spend a little bit of time sort of bringing ourselves into the sort of general context of the UW campus. And their project is really to go to campus and to pick really 9 different buildings that they can really spend some time on. I have some examples here of some different students' work. And then they also reflect on what was it like to plan the project, what did they expect to see, and then what did they actually see. So it's a bigger piece of that week 2 project that really takes them forward into a different space, ideally a campus space. And then as a backup option, I keep Bellevue College as my campus space for those who can't get to Bellevue, University of Washington's campus. So that's a good way to see at least my use of Google Earth, and it's a way for me to teach quickly on topics when students have questions about buildings, particularly from a perspective of understanding what's around it, or maybe I want to bring up the point about its material presence or particular colors that stand out, patterns and texture. Now, these projects, again, I'm a historian, are often starting with these are flat historic photos. So we spend oftentimes class looking at what does this building look like at its beginning or at its time period. We may look at something that is a historic record. So again, keeping with the sort of activities of an architectural historian, how do you document buildings and understand buildings? And then again, coming into it using Google Earth as my example for these two, so that students can spend some time having fun and playing around. Now, my last example, and I know this is just a short presentation, and again, happy to follow up with you, is that we we visit the XR lab, which is a great opportunity to use both the Oculus goggles and also spend some time being in a space and hearing from the XR lab team, what does XR do? And talking about joining the XR club. So really promoting this wonderful opportunity we have at the college. While the students are in the XR lab, I give them a list of particular buildings to visit. And then from that list, they come up with a mashup. It's their last project of the term, and I want it to be fun. I want it to be creative. This is one of my students' work that I can share with you that was really about looking at some of those different buildings, and each student comes up with a building, a lighting fixture, and a furniture feature. The student had some more drawing practice, and they talk a little bit about what's it like to think about things and sort of see them in different ways, both the textbook and class PowerPoints and virtual, and then kind of come up with new ideas. And so these are the three that I wanted to kind of share with you as a discussion thread. I wanted to close up by saying there's many other opportunities in the class that I talk about or use, the sort of immersive opportunities, particularly 3D spaces. Google Arts and Culture is terrific. So I'm showing you one of the examples that we looked at from Gaudi's Sagrada Familia. And so that's in Google Arts and Culture. We also use quite a bit SciArc, which is a wonderful also site to look at, where we look at different buildings and sort of consider how do we understand historic architecture from many different perspectives. We also use Masterworks when in the XR lab as a subscription, but we've been using that. We used it quite a bit before the pandemic, but it also had that terrific opportunity. And then lastly, this same site that for my graduate program that continues to be added to. It would be terrific, like Max talked about, the longer we teach and the more we're here, the more we can sort of build on what we've started here in our teaching at Bellevue College. So that's a short run through of thinking about 3 opportunities in which I am integrating immersive learning in my architecture classes. And that's my time, so thank you.
A quick question for Max, maybe for Deborah as well, but you showed us all the geological things. How do you have the class actually see those? So do you have to come in and look at it in a headset, or do you have the ability for students, no matter where they are, to experience those, and if so, how?
Great question. Right, so I'm on here. All right. For the static 3-dimensional models, I host them on Sketchfab, and I do, if I allow on Sketchfab for the models to be downloaded by the public, I can host as much as I want for free. So then the other, for the games, those are hosted on itch.io, and I host there for free as well. Students don't have to pay anything to play the games, and so I go from Unity to WebGL, which is a platform for which they just need an internet connection, and I recommend using a mouse, but a lot of students are playing these with their tablets, or they're great with the trackpad. I'm not a very effective gamer compared to a lot of the students that I see. But yeah, those are the 2 main places I host them.
Just a subtle note about what Max said, possibly in the WebGL, but definitely in things like Sketchfab.
Mm-hmm.
It's device independent. So if he creates a model that might even be interactive, you can put a headset on and look it up and put it in mixed reality in your room. Or you can look at it on your phone and do similar things with it. So it's great to see tools like that being used, because you can design it in one, but then share it with everybody, no matter what device they're on.
Right. And thank you for that, because that's a really important thing here at the XR Lab as well. I mean, we bring classes down and and the groups try on headsets, and that's our big magic moment. And that's a lot of fun, but not every student wants to wear a headset, as we talked about here, or not every student can wear a headset. And so if all we did was headsets, we probably wouldn't survive. And so more than half of what we do is helping faculty build content for online learning and placing it within Canvas. So, I hope that we really emphasize to you how powerful XR is in the headset. and then also how it can be accessible and more accessible still, something we're striving for. And then also that it can be used on multiple devices, which is very important. And just that it can really be an extremely powerful educational tool, which is what which is what Ethan and Chad were talking about, as well as Max and Jeff and Kay.